Hello, everybody, and welcome to the season 2 premiere of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, a real life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, serving clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. Season 2, y'all, we're here. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be back. I missed everybody so much. I missed the podcast. But I appreciate all the kind words and understanding. For those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, I'm going to ask at the top of the show, please go over to your Bish Therapist on Instagram and give me a follow. Please also go over to YouTube and subscribe. The more subscribers and followers I get, the more content I can produce. So please help a sister out and go ahead and do that. Also, I would love if you could go over to wherever you listen to the podcast. And if you're enjoying it, please give a 5-star review. I am learning slowly that I have to promote myself more while this is about helping people. And that is my passion. I also want to help me too. And so the more, followers and subscribers I can get, the more content I can bring to you. But the reason I bring that up is that if you're not following me on Instagram, you're really missing out because number one, I do a lot of great clinical interpretations written on there that I post. But number two, I'll post a lot of updates. So the reason that season 2 was a little delayed, for those of you who don't know, is I do have a chronic cancer. I do have a lot of other chronic health issues. And truly, my full-time job is taking care of myself. I'm a professional patient, as I like to call myself. Many other chronic illness folks know exactly what I mean by that. So, for me, what I'm doing is just the most amazing thing I could have ever hoped for. It's taken off in such a way. I have so many new listeners and followers, and I just want to take a moment to say thank you. I am so incredibly grateful. And thank you for your patience, because sometimes I may have a situation where, I plan to record a pod, but if my body has other ideas, and, that's just how it is. So I do plan to do a whole podcast episode kind of giving a little bit of insight into the issues that I'm dealing with, and just A, to help people understand more, but B, I have had a lot of chronic illness folks reach out to me and thank me for, my advocacy and sharing my experience, strength, and hope. So that is what I'm going to continue to do. However, for today's episode is going to be a banger. I am coming in hot with Paris in Love season 2. For this episode, I watched Paris in Love season 1, Paris in Love season 2. I watched a documentary on Netflix about, I think it's called Teenage Hell Camp, which kind of talks about some of these quote unquote therapeutic camps that kids like Paris get sent to. Because in the documentary, one of the things she is fiercely advocating for is for these camps to be done away with because they're awful. So I'm actually going to do a part 2 episode to this as well, where I talk more about the hell camp that Paris experienced, what that means. I actually worked. It was a good facility, but it was kind of a troubled teen industry type place. So I have a lot of insight and awareness. That was my first job out of school. So I do have a lot of insight and awareness into that. So today's first episode is going to cover Paris in Love, season 1 and 2. And I also went ahead and I got her memoir, because I think that, to be honest, if you don't know Paris really well, by the end of this episode, she's going to be your new icon. If you would have told me that, I don't stan anyone. And for people who don't know what that is, standing someone is just like a term for just like obsessively loving a celebrity. I tend to see all parts of people. And so whether you're a celebrity or not, I don't idealize celebrity. But after reading Paris's book and after watching Paris in Love, I can say that I am so intensely proud of Paris. She truly is an absolute icon. She saved her own life. She's being a cycle breaker. I just cannot love her anymore. So, which, I don't know that I ever thought I would have like really strong opinions about Paris. When I was growing up, she was, you know, having troubles as a teen and, in and out of a lot of different situations. And as an adult and as a therapist now, I can look back at all those, Simple Life and all of the things that I watched, and you can almost see her trauma now for me from this perspective. So my goal today is to truly be a voice for Paris, because she has her own voice and it's loud now and it's strong and I'm so proud of her. But I really do want to, for those folks who maybe wrote her off or just didn't know, I want to share Paris's experience, strength, and hope with others because I think she has a very, very important message. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with a trigger warning, because this episode we're going to talk or touch on sexual abuse. Paris did discuss a history of that, physical abuse, child abuse, a lot of that stuff due to the camps that she was sent to. So we're going to talk about a lot of that. Again, I'm always going to talk about it from a place of care and compassion and psychoeducation. But if this is something that's fresh for you, just please make your best decision about the content that you're taking in. So that is the trigger warning for this episode. And the other thing before I get into this that I'm just going to outline is that every episode for season 2, I hope to just be a little bit different. I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback and perspectives on things that you want to hear about. However, I just want to let you guys know I have all my notes ready for Gypsy Rose Blanchard. I watched, the Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose Blanchard on Lifetime, and I also watched, 2020, so I've done a deep dive on that. And I also have watched The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, both seasons. There were season 1 and season 2. Season 2, She Talks. Season 1, The Family Talks. Holy moly. I have a lot of notes and episodes on that too. So what you can expect for season 2 is a whole lot of stuff. Some of it's Bravo, some of it's not. I am a complete true crime junkie. So Gypsy Rose and Natalia Grace and, a lot of that other stuff really interests me. And I think it interests a lot of people. So you can look forward to a lot of very broad and great episodes in the future. But today we're going to start with Paris and Love. So here we go. Let's just get into it. So for those of you who didn't watch it, I will give kind of an overview to describe a little bit of what Paris and Love was about. So season 1 of Paris and Love, I think it was 12 episodes. It told the love story between her and her fiance, Carter Reum. I think that's how it's pronounced. It is spelled Reum. I think they pronounce it Reum. So Paris has had, fiancés before. She's been engaged. And so the first season was really her truly sharing how her history of trauma impacted her relationships, which of course it's going to, right? So, she talked about being engaged to people who just weren't right for her, and she had a lot of hesitation and she didn't want to say no and things like that. And so her season 1 was just her showing, I love this man, he supports me, I feel seen and heard and loved for the first time truly in my life. And it just, ultimately, Paris deserves to be happy. She has had so much trauma, which I'm going to discuss and explain, but she is just such a beautiful soul. I just cannot emphasize it enough. So in season 1, it showed the planning of the wedding and, it showed the wedding and all of that. And then season 2 showed Paris and Carter's journey to parenthood. Paris and her husband decided to use a surrogate to have their first son, Phoenix, and their second daughter, London. And I just want to say one thing is that, I lost my ability to have children after ovarian cancer, and I think that there's the talk around how women procreate just should stop. It There's no wrong way to bring a child into your family, and I just think we should stop talking about it and shaming and judging and all of these things. It's just gross, and to be honest, it's really hurtful. I've had things said to me. People knew that I wasn't able to have children, and I've been shamed and I've been judged, and it's just it's just a crappy feeling. So if you don't want to do that to someone, you may be well intentioned. Just don't. I don't ever ask. I don't care if someone is crowning in front of me. I'm not going to mention their body or touch them or whatever. It's just, I think we just all need to be respectful about the process. And Paris had her reasons for that, and there's just no wrong way to have a family. So the second season was really ripe for a lot of clinical interpretation, because there was a lot of Kathy, a lot of her mom, Kathy Hilton, a lot of her sister, Nikki. We saw a lot of Carter, and we really got more of a glimpse into how significant some of Paris's trauma really truly was. So I'm just here to kind of sing her praises, to talk a little bit about that. And, so I have a whole bunch of observations. So the first thing I'm going to say is, again, for people who didn't watch Paris in Love, or people who did, I want to talk a little bit about Carter, who he is, because he's kind of a relatively unknown. I mean, now he's not, because he's married to Paris Hilton. But so Carter is he made his money from, he has a net worth, if you can trust online, he has a net worth of about 40 million from early investing in Ring, Rothy's, and Snapchat. His dad was CEO of Amstead Industries, which is one of the largest enterprises in the country, worth about $4 billion. So that is who Carter is. Paris Hilton, by the way, her net worth is about 300 million. So, she's a boss, like in every sense of the word. And I'm going to talk about her work ethic, because it actually comes from trauma, in my opinion. And, I think that's really interesting, because people think that trauma behaviors are always negative, but sometimes a trauma behavior comes about that on the surface it looks really positive, but the reason, the why underneath it can be really damaging. So I'm going to talk about that. So Carter, the interesting thing about Carter that I'm going to say is Carter has a 9-year-old daughter with someone named Laura Belizzi. She's a reality star who appeared on a VH1 show called Secrets of Aspen. Apparently, she also dated Mel Gibson. Just like a random side note. And apparently Carter, well, not apparently. So Carter financially supports the child, but he has no relationship with the child. So, does that give me pause? Yes. But do I know anything about the situation? I don't. Perhaps that's how the mother wanted it. Perhaps, I can't speak about that specifically. I'm just sharing the information, because I think a lot of folks are protective of Paris, and honestly, myself included, because I just think she is just a beautiful soul. And no one wants her to get hurt. But, what I observed from Carter is that he and Kathy, actually, they share some really significant similarities. I think that both Kathy and Carter really like to have a lot of control over Paris. They like to exert a lot of control. Now, I think Carter does it because that's how he thinks he can best protect her or support her. But there is definitely another side to that coin that I've noticed. I feel that, Carter appears to attend to Paris's emotions, or try to, but he has this, and this is really common in men. He has this kind of like toxic positivity / problem solver mindset. So stereotypically, straight cis men, when their female partner is struggling, they want to solve problems. They want to say, well, I'm your protector. I want to fix this. But the thing is that usurps your partner's ability to deal with it themselves. And that truly isn't always support. It's sometimes, people just need to be heard and validated and listened to. And just like, that's enough. But sometimes men, they have good intentions, but they try to be fixers and problem solvers. And then, oh, excuse me, I just hit my thing. My bad. Um, so I think that he truly loves her, but he is not able to sit with her and just observe her pain. In fairness, this is a skill that is learned. And for men, I think this whole idea of chivalry and, all of that, like needing to save their partner, there's a lot of societal messaging in that. So just a note, it's, if you're listening and you do that, okay, no shame or judgment, just work on, all we can do is just work on being present, listening, validating. And listen, if our partner, here's a good phrase you could use, ask your partner, is this something you're looking for solutions, or is this, would it be best for me to just listen? What do you need from me? I think that's always like a great way to approach it, because we never want to accidentally give someone the message, that they're not capable of managing their own stuff. And Paris is beyond capable, despite the fact that I think Carter and lots of people kind of baby her. So, the one thing he does really well is he supports Paris. And he said something that just really stuck out to me. He said, for Paris, control means power. And he also said, I'm your teammate, and your best friend. So here's the thing. I'm giving Carter the benefit of the doubt because Paris has earned the right to make her choices. And so if she feels Carter is a great partner and, he's, to have the insight that he does, that for Paris, control means power, I think that's great. I think he loves her dearly, and, their son is beautiful. And, the one thing also I'm going to say while I'm on this topic, because it's really grossed me out, is the comments about their son's head. I'm not going to dignify it with saying exactly what people were saying, but there were some really disgusting comments that people made about Phoenix. And I'm just speechless, because sometimes it's like humanity seems to like one up itself with terribleness, and I just don't understand it. Leave this child alone. He's a beautiful child. There's nothing wrong with him. And I just feel the rhetoric around it has been so gross. So that's what I want to say about that. So the last thing that I'm going to say before moving on to Paris and Kathy is that I think that Carter and Kathy kind of have a competitive relationship for like who's going to be number one in Paris's life. And, that is a conflict that is super common after people get married, depending on the family dynamic. So I think that that's something that I'm also going to address. It's just really something that I noticed. So I'm going to start with a couple observations, really important ones about Paris from season 2. So the main thing that I want to talk a little bit about is her baby voice versus her normal voice. I think that for me in this show, it's the one most interesting when it happens, when it shifts, the baby voice versus the normal voice, okay? When you see it shift on screen, it is like a lesson in trauma. So for those of you who don't know, survivors of trauma, specifically sexual assault, can present with a kind of high-pitched, childlike voice. In fact, as a therapist, that is kind of one of the red flags that I tend to notice when people are coming in with a really significant history that maybe, it takes time to trust someone and talk to someone about that. But there, in my practice, there has been experience and some correlation with that voice and unresolved trauma. So what I will say is that sexual abuse and trauma often impacts it. It's really common. And when she slips in and out of the voice, there are no coincidences about where and when it happens. And it was truly like a tennis match for me watching this, because I was watching. So, for example, when Paris talks about her businesses, no baby voice. Why is that? Because she feels in control, in her power, and in her money, honey. She is working and she is protecting herself through building an empire where she can never be mistreated again. Okay. So when she talks in that confident way, it's her true voice. She goes back to the baby voice whenever she's around Kathy, number one. Number two, whenever she's feeling misunderstood or not heard, because, one of the fascinating things that I don't know if people caught this is that Kathy and Paris both acknowledged this baby voice, and Paris learned it from Kathy. Okay. So, really, what this baby voice is, it's a generational trauma of people having to make themselves really small and cute and tiny in order to try to get their needs met. And I think that goes for Kathy as well. So it's manipulative, but it comes from a place, with Paris anyway, of just trying to get a need met. So I just wanted, I just thought that people would find that interesting. One of the other major observations that I found is that most folks who have unresolved trauma, because let me be clear, Paris's trauma, I've been in the field for over 20 years, and the trauma that she was exposed to truly is some of the most egregious I've ever seen. And in part two, I'm going to talk specifically more about that because I just have so much in this episode. It's too much. But from reading her book and understanding what she went through, with her parents, with these teenage hell camps, afterwards, how she was treated, it's a miracle that this person is able to function at all. I'm very serious. It shows how mentally strong and resilient she is. Because this is no short order of trauma. So because of the unresolved nature of the trauma, she, I believe, is emotionally immature, as all folks are who have unprocessed trauma, myself included. Before I processed all of my trauma, I definitely had emotional immaturity, and I'm a therapist. So, working through trauma has been the way for me to grow. And so will Paris. So the other thing I noticed, that she uses sunglasses as her armor. Kathy uses lip gloss, truly, and I will discuss this. She uses lip gloss as armor, and Paris uses sunglasses. I think she uses them to feel safe. She uses them to feel protected, and I believe that's why she has a closet full of them. People who collect things and hold on to things, there's usually psychological reasons underneath when it gets to be like a huge collection. I mean, if you saw her sunglasses collection, I mean, it's bananas. There are so many. So to me, that really just showed that she feels like she needs those for her armor. And I believe, in my opinion, that will start to fall away once she starts to take her power back and really live in her truth. So one of the major things that kept coming up in the beginning that I was writing notes about is, Paris kept saying, my schedule is out of control. And I kept thinking, but she's in control of that schedule. So that told me that there was probably a trauma response underneath it. And let me be very clear. I read my disclaimer at the end, but I am not here to diagnose Paris. I'm not here to say what she has, what she doesn't have. That is between her and her practitioner. But it is clear that she has had a significant amount of trauma and she's having trauma responses. So I'm using the term generally, just to be really super clear about that. So what I realized through watching season 2 is that Paris, because of the hell that she was sent to at these teenage camps, she views money as success, power, and protection. So truly, her work ethic is actually a trauma response. So people who work as a trauma response, the reason they do it is so that they don't have a second to think. Because when you have that much trauma, like, you're going to have really severe physiological, emotional reactions and triggers, like, all the time. And so I think that for her money, her work ethic is attached to her survival. So therefore, she's working to distract herself, to avoid feeling those really painful emotions. And the sad thing about that is when it comes from that place, it's not the healthiest approach. So I'm just hoping that through therapy, she will be able to see and understand that, to get a more balanced approach to life. Because listen, she's always going to work and be amazing. And she's so multifaceted and truly multi-talented. She has a great voice. She wrote a book with the help of a ghostwriter, but still, I mean, like, she's very accomplished and she's very smart. So I think that she deserves better, is my point, to have a better work-life balance. And so I hope that she's able to achieve that. One huge thing related to that I observed is that throughout pretty much season 1 and 2, we rarely saw Paris eat. And when she did, it was like, it was like McDonald's, or kind of like, it felt very black and white. It felt very, either she wasn't eating anything, or she was, going in and getting McDonald's, like $200 worth of food, and just like, whatever. So to me, usually trauma creates control issues, and food is one of the ways that those control issues get acted out in real life. So a lot of trauma survivors, a lot of people with chronic or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which I've always said that, sometimes the brain, your wires get crossed, and all of a sudden you see food as something that can be controlled. So I think also that unhealed and unresolved trauma, it can really decrease appetite. Severe anxiety related to unresolved trauma, it creates a lack of appetite. So I think that I would love to see Paris truly meet her needs in the way that she deserves. Because the problem is that when we're children, and if we've suffered abuse and trauma and our needs haven't been met in certain ways, we subconsciously recreate those neglectful runways that we've suffered, essentially. So, if your parents were neglectful growing up, you may have internalized their voice and then self-neglect. So that's why I'm such a preacher for self-care, because Paris her needs were severely neglected, and she was abused, and she was all these things. But it's time for her to realize that now she's the adult, now she's in charge, and now she deserves better. And we all deserve better. So we deserve to nourish our bodies, to be good to our mind, body, and soul. So it's just a gentle reminder that you're not alone if that's something that you're struggling with. And unfortunately, the only way out is through. And the reason I say unfortunately is because I wish there was a better answer I had for people, but the answer for pain is pain. And I've said this in season 1, and it's true. We have to believe that we're strong enough to survive the journey. And I promise you, as a therapist who's been doing this a long time, I've never seen it break anybody. And in fact, I've seen it, with myself included, lead to open a door of beautiful, wonderful, amazing things. So please don't fear. You can do it. And, it's just, you just have to be ready. So, I hope Paris, through becoming, a parent and learning how, to love her child, through that, sometimes that's also healing for mothers. Being able to give your child something that you didn't have, there's also a lot of therapeutic benefit in that. So one of the things in that same vein that I wanted to discuss is that mom guilt is very real. So again, I don't have children, but I can speak about, I do love children. I love my niece and nephew. I've participated in raising them, and, I've done therapy with families. So I understand how it works. Mom guilt is triggered sometimes by toxic guilt and shame from the past. So having a child can trigger unresolved PTSD and emotions because, for example, if you see, let's say you were abused when you were 3, and then you have a child and you see how helpless and small they are at 3, it can trigger so much stuff for you because you realized what may have happened, right? And that's just a for instance. So Paris was able to avoid and deny, like, her and Kathy are avoidance champions. I've truly never seen any two people better at avoidance than them. But when you have a child, it busts through that, what I'm going to call cognitive dissonance. So when stuff happens to us, we can ignore it, avoid it, distract, justify, whatever. But then when you have a child and you see how helpless and beautiful and sweet they are, it does tend to trigger, some of our stuff. And that's normal. So I think that as she progresses in her motherhood, she will, that cognitive dissonance, which is essentially where we think one thing, but then we see something and we're like, well, this doesn't totally match. This doesn't make sense. I think she will continue to bust through that. And, at the end of season 2, we did see a therapy session, which you all know I love a therapy session. So I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And Paris did say, in the documentary, well, I think it was a documentary. I'm not sure what Paris in Love, what you would call it, reality show. I don't know. But she said, I correlate success to freedom. So Paris does have insight into how her work ethic is actually a trauma response. And her entire life and her empire is basically a protective moat around her. So some people, in my opinion, like Paris, I think she tried to get so famous and so big that literally there's a moat around her. No one can get to her. No one can hurt her. So I think she's an amazing person, but I do think it came from, a place of trauma. Okay, so let's go to, I want to talk a little bit about Nikki and Kathy and some of the observations that I had, because there were a couple scenes with them talking that there were some interesting concepts that I wanted to talk about. So I find it interesting that, Nikki and Paris are best friends, but like throughout the show, they both kind of joked, and Paris even wrote about it in her book, that like Nikki was like a consummate tattletale. And I find it interesting because, Paris has a lot of trust issues. And so it surprises me that she's not more angry with her sister. And listen, maybe she is, and she's just not comfortable feeling that emotion. I can't speak to that. But I think that Nikki and Paris are just fundamentally different people. You can tell they have different personalities by nature. They were just born differently, and they have different approaches to life. Plus, Nikki, from what I understand, did not experience the significant traumas that Paris did. And so, when things like this happen in a loving family, because here's the thing, everything I'm saying about Kathy Hilton and Nikki and Carter, whoever, they adore Paris. And I believe that they do not have malicious intent, including Kathy. She does not have malicious intent. It's just sometimes they don't know how to truly sometimes we don't know how to love our family members. We just don't. We do the best we can. And I'm not saying that's okay, but that's their generational thing. So everyone in the family has their own guilt, I'm sure, about what Paris went through. Baron is the youngest brother, Nikki. I mean, I know they all do. And I saw it in some of their eyes and their faces when they talked about this issue. So I give them a lot of credit for being willing to like be raw and real. So the one major thing I notice with Kathy and Nikki is there is a lot of what I'm going to call triangulation, which is a therapeutic term. I'm going to explain it. So triangulation is where one person, so it's literally picture a triangle. So one person in a triad, so three people, exploits an interaction between the two people who aren't communicating directly. It's usually a form of manipulation, and it serves to kind of divert attention or gain control. Okay. So what was really interesting to me about this is that Nikki and Kathy were having this discussion without Paris about what's best for Phoenix. And they were like talking about how Phoenix shouldn't go with Paris on her book tour. And either Nikki or Kathy, one of them said to the other, like, oh, you should talk to Paris about this because she really needs to leave. They wanted Paris to leave Phoenix with Kathy. And the way, though, they went about it was triangulation. And it's not good. And I think that that's ultimately what leads Paris to want to keep people at arm's length, because it can't feel good to have watched back, your mom and your sister try to talk about what's best for your child and what you should do. But like, I get it, as I have a sister I am obsessed with her children. So I also understand it comes from a place of love. But it was just like a really interesting example of how I think Paris kind of feels like there's triangulation and she's like left out sometimes. But also, I think there is this underlying thing of like Paris feels that she wasn't protected as a child. Like her parents didn't protect her because they sent her to these camps, not knowing what was going on, but also not listening to her when she talked about what was happening. Now they were manipulated too, and I'm going to talk about that. But how can Paris, here's my question. How can Paris trust her family who created her trauma or sent her to where the trauma was created? How can she trust them with her child? I think that we can't demonize Paris for wanting, at least on a subconscious level, to just know where her child is and to be with her child so that her child is not getting exposed to things that she doesn't want. That's a fact. So, I don't know what else to say about that. So I want to talk a little bit about Kathy and a little bit about this really interesting interaction that happened when Paris's book came out. So there was a scene with Paris, Nikki, and Kathy discussing Paris's memoir, which I have right here. And here are some observations, because I think for me, of the entire season, that was the most clinically significant part for me. So Paris sits down with Kathy and Nikki to talk about, there are a lot of bombshells in this book, by the way. She pulls no punches and is honest about the hierarchy of their family, how it works, and her abuse and her trauma. And I guess, Kathy wasn't aware of all the things that happened, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But Paris reverted back to like a nervous, giggling child. She really used the baby voice. She was slouching. She was kind of like, her nonverbals were telling me that she was just like dying inside, and I just felt so bad for her. So Kathy asked Paris about her ghostwriter, and she was really upset about something that was written in the book, and I'm going to read to you what that is. And what was interesting is you can tell as Kathy is talking to Paris about this ghostwriter, she gets so angry that it's like a switch that goes on in Kathy's mind. She literally completely changes her face. And starts talking about Botox. And then she makes an interesting comment about how she felt like Paris was looking at her odd, and that must be what Paris was thinking, that she needed Botox. Okay, my God. So here's some major components about this whole thing. Kathy, I believe, has had a lot of her own trauma. I've discussed this in podcasts before. There's a book called House of Hilton. That, by the way, is really hard to get. Gee, I wonder why. But there's a lot of information in this book that talks about, and Kyle Richards has even intimated that, big Kathy Hilton's mother, was a really volatile person, and Kathy was exposed to a lot of violence, a lot of trauma, a lot of stuff. And I think there was one moment where Kathy started to talk about her struggles as a child with hearing things she shouldn't have heard. And so what I appreciated about Kathy sharing about this is it made her feel less like a villain and more just like, we're all children. We all have inner children that have needs either that weren't met, abused, some more than others. But Kathy was a victim too. And so I feel that Kathy truly, I have to be really mindful about what I say here. So I apologize that I'm kind of stammering, but Kathy Hilton's a very powerful woman, and I'm really not trying to upset anyone or piss anybody off, because that's not my goal. It's just, I think that she really struggles to feel what she feels because she was taught that you just shouldn't. And so what Kathy does is she puts stuff in a box and puts it away and then never goes back to it. And so the box gets moldy and dusty. And after time, what was once not her fault morphs into her now maybe accidentally perpetrating some abuse onto Paris because of her lack of willingness to go back to the box and open it up and sort through it. And I hope that makes sense. I like using that analogy because sometimes when we're experiencing a lot of painful emotions, we do need to put stuff in a box and put it up on a shelf for a period of time, but we can't leave it there forever, because otherwise that leads to mental health issues and personality issues and all of these things in people who are not inherently bad people. I think Kathy loves her daughter very much. And I just think she's done the best she knows how to do. And unfortunately, for those of us who have parents who loved us the best that they could, but sometimes that's not enough. The trauma we experience is because they didn't know how to do better, but like, that sucks. That just sucks. So Paris, here's the part of the book I'm going to read to you what Kathy was upset about. So in the book, it says, I've avoided talking about some of these issues for decades. I'm an issue avoiding machine. Again, Paris has good insight. She's an issue avoiding machine because she learned it from Kathy. I've never seen anyone avoid an issue like Kathy. I learned from the best, my parents. Nikki says mom and dad are the king and queen of sweeping things under the rug. There is a hierarchy, and these are the rules in my family. 1, if you don't talk about a thing, it's not a problem. 2, if you hide how deeply something hurt you, it didn't happen. And 3, and this is what Kathy got really mad about, if you pretend not to notice how deeply you hurt someone else, you don't have to feel bad about it. Paris, I mean, just let's do a little clap for Paris, because really what we're seeing is her actively being a cycle breaker. She's right. And sometimes when our parents have hurt us because they weren't able to do better, that's hurtful for them, but that's too bad. We all have to be accountable for the things that we do. And so I think that, Kathy got really angry because, in the Hilton family, I get the sense that they just want to appear perfect, right? A lot of families of a certain socioeconomic status do feel this way too. I've worked with many different families in many different socioeconomic statuses, and there is, with wealthy families, there definitely is there's a culture. Okay. There's a sweep it under the rug. If want to get an inheritance, if whatever, there's a lot of this kind of like control stuff. It's very common. And I'm just really grateful that Paris spoke about it, but also it made Kathy really mad. And, I'm sorry, but that's, Kathy's going to have to deal with it. She's a grown adult. I think that Kathy is mad that Paris isn't coming to her while giving real life examples of why she can't talk to her, right? So Kathy's like, well, why aren't you talking to me about this? But she's also shaming Paris for like writing this in the book. So I think that's the thing. It's like, well, you're giving a verbal message, but your nonverbal message is completely different. And I think Kathy just has to understand and own up to that. And I think for me, one of the most painful parts of the entire season 2 was there was one nugget in this scene where Kathy admitted that she was working with Roseanne Arquette, and Roseanne told Kathy that something was wrong, and she encouraged her to ask Paris. Like, Roseanne Arquette looked at Paris's behavior, recognized it, and said, this is a kid who's acting out, and you should really talk to her about this. And Kathy never asked. Never asked. And here's what's devastating about this. Producers asked Paris about this. She looked like she wanted to curl up in a ball and die. She couldn't even comment. She said, I have no comment on that, because she knows any comment that she was going to make was going to upset her mother. But she appeared so heartbroken by the thought of what if. Paris's life, her entire life, could have been different if when she started acting out. So here's the synopsis of what happened. In 8th grade, she was groomed by a teacher at her public school into a romantic relationship. And then she was drugged and sexually abused at a party when she was, I believe, 13. So Paris, after this happened, her going out, her drinking, her all of it was self-medication. And unfortunately, I'm going to talk more about this in part 2. People love to pathologize teenagers and forget what it's like to be one. And people are so quick to look at a teenager and say, how dare you behave X, X, and Y, and pathologize the behavior instead of just saying, wow, this isn't like you. What's going on? I'm concerned. It's like if you see a 3-year-old throwing a tantrum, like that's socially acceptable because kids are little. But for some reason, it's like when we grow and grow into bigger bodies, there's this societal fallacy that teenagers are like adults. They're not. Even 20-year-olds aren't adults. Our brains, let me be real clear about something. Our brains do not fully develop until we are 25 years old. And the last parts of the brain to develop are the prefrontal cortexes, which control impulses. Teenagers are developmentally supposed to go through hormonal adjustments and periods of time. And instead of being pathologized, if we just as a society looked at them and said, hey, what's going on? I know this is a hard time. I remember what it was like to be a teenager. You couldn't pay me $1 million to go back there. Sincerely, you really couldn't. So I just think that this is also a PSA in terms of like, let's not pathologize teenagers. If you notice someone you love struggling, just talk to them about it. Could you imagine if someone would have done that for Paris and she didn't go to these camps and suffer the abuse that she suffered, right? So I think, and of course, hindsight is always 2020, but it's just a really important PSA that, I do want to put out there. In the scene, there were quotes that Kathy was saying, which I just want to repeat, which Kathy said, you are unusual. You were like a wild animal. You're an alien. Okay. So Paris says in response to that, I was traumatized, which when she said that, I was like, oh, go Paris. Yay. Nikki says, where does this stem from? So Nikki asked Kathy, where does this stem from? Kathy says in an interview, well, I'm sorry, during the scene, Kathy says, I'm a Pisces, which I just rolled my eyes and I'm like, come on, bro. And then in an interview, she says, I'm in denial. It's been working so far. Maybe it works for me. And truly that moment is when I really did develop a lot of empathy for Kathy, because isn't that so sad that she thinks that's the best solution? Like, she cannot see the forest for the trees and look at how much pain she's caused because she hasn't been able to feel her own pain. And so because she doesn't want to feel her own pain, she keeps projecting this stuff onto Paris. So Paris said, and I quote, I wish you could see past the ghostwriter to understand the depth of what I went through. Denial and avoidance is a hard habit to break. Oh, more claps for Paris. More claps. More claps. Kathy said that Paris signed up for this, but not everybody else did. And that's when Paris said she cares more about other people's opinions than my feelings. And that's a fact. And so unfortunately, there's some folks are concerned more about their image than have they actually hurt somebody that they love. And I understand that that's a hard pill to swallow, but Paris is right. And Kathy, it would behoove Kathy to really, Paris has a lot of wisdom, and it would behoove Kathy to maybe take her lead with some stuff. And towards the end, it seems like she did. So I'm going to talk about the scene with Paris and her mom, having group or therapy. Also, one thing before I move on to that, episode 7 featured Paris going to Washington, D.C. to speak at an event to stop institutional child abuse so she literally is working with congressmen to invoke the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. And she is the voice of railing against this troubled teen industry. And I swear to God, I have goosebumps right now talking about it. I just feel so proud of Paris. The emotional strength and fortitude that takes is unreal, especially because, you see Kathy actively avoiding, Carter talking about how Paris feels and Kathy commenting about how pale she is. She just cannot directly address feelings. And again, Kathy deserves better than that. So I hope for her, she really is able to work on that. And with the work Paris has been doing, I'm going to talk more about that in next week's episode. So in the scene with Kathy and Paris and the therapist, I love a therapist. I love seeing it on TV. And I think that Dr. Bethany did a really amazing job helping these two women actually have a conversation and kind of reach some sort of understanding. So Paris is truly determined to break the cycle through having tough conversations. And what I want to say about this is that I want this to give everybody hope who is in a cycle of kind of generational trauma. We only need one person in the entire system to make a change, and the entire system changes around them, whether they like it or not. So please do not minimize. If you are a cycle breaker, welcome, and you're amazing, and you're doing the work, and it's not for nothing. We're never going to change people, but through boundaries and becoming aware of generational traumas, we can change our dynamic with our family. It's amazing. Kathy, continue to say things to Paris like, you're an unusual person. You don't like to have conversations. Ultimately, this is just Kathy projecting. This is how Kathy feels about herself. It's classic projection. And I'm going to be very honest. Kathy is lucky that Paris truly loves and adores her and knows her true intent, because Kathy's behavior would be enough for a lot of folks to say, I can't have you in my life. Truly. I mean, I've worked with families who there's no contact and things like that. And so I don't think Kathy fully understands that Paris is giving her a lot of grace and love unconditionally. And ultimately that's all Paris wants back in return. We can't say to someone, you're an unusual alien. That's not healthy. Because Paris is not an unusual alien. She's not. She's a very healthy person reacting to an extreme amount of trauma and BS. So Dr. Bethany helped Paris understand how her trauma was getting in the way of getting what she wants, both with her time with her son and with her work schedule. I was so grateful to see that conversation happen. I believe that Paris internalized Kathy's voice. So all of Paris's fears were lived experiences, and a lot of adults have internalized their parents' voice. One other thing is that although, Paris talks a lot about ADHD, and all I want to say about this is I can't dispute it. I'm not diagnosing. She works with professionals. They know better. But what I just want to be clear about is that sometimes post-traumatic stress disorder disguises itself as an attention deficit issue when it's really more trauma. And a trauma-informed therapist would be able to tell the difference between this. So just for anyone out there listening, I just encourage, some education around that, because and listen, sometimes it could be both too. So I just want to be clear about that. So one important healing tool that I want to share, which was discussed in this scene with Dr. Bethany, is this is now, not then. Okay. So for people who have post-traumatic stress disorder and they get triggered by things, this happens to me all the time. I have to remind myself, I'm an adult. This is now, this is not then. And here are the ways that this can be different for me. That is a huge, huge trauma tool. So from me to you. Bethany talked about making decisions on data, not feelings, which is insightful because, if we're acting on irrational emotions, because emotions don't move in rational channels, they don't. So it doesn't mean your feelings aren't valid. It just means sometimes they're always not rational and reality based. So I think it's looking at facts versus feelings. Feelings are not facts. That's always what I used to say. The one last thing that I want to address that I feel is really interesting is that Dr. Bethany talks about how Paris gave up authority to the baby nanny regarding Phoenix. And I was so grateful that this was brought up because I felt I noticed the same thing. She's telling herself messages that so in season 2, there are things that Kathy says to Paris that she literally says verbatim about her own inabilities to do stuff. And then it's like, well, I wonder where it comes from. So it's an internalized voice. She's been given the message that she's an alien, that she's unusual, that she was wild animal, that she was acting out, instead of you were in pain and you were behaving like a human. So from that comes this sense of, I can't take care of my own child. Right? Because if we don't think that we can take care of ourselves, how on earth do we have any competence in our ability to raise a child? And so, unfortunately, it's all gaslighting, because Paris is one of the most competent individuals, I swear to you, that I've ever come across. She needs to start believing it. Okay. And all in all, I just appreciated that session to discuss the generational trauma. And I do appreciate Kathy getting on board. Because it really comes from a place of her own pain. So one of the last thing I'll say is one of the quotes that Kathy said, I love my mother more than anything. I don't think it's right to have a child overhear drama. I heard things that broke my heart and I would cry. My stepfather loved me like his own. I didn't like the way mom spoke freely with her friends about me negatively. It made me unhappy. So essentially, Kathy mirrored her own trauma with Paris, because there was one thing that was wild to me that Paris said, is that Kathy experienced the same things that Paris experienced Kathy doing to her. Paris said she found Kathy and her sisters, so I'm going to guess it was Kyle and Kim, those are the only sisters she has, reading Paris's diary out loud and making jokes about it. So which completely blew my mind. I mean, it wasn't surprising, but here is an example, right, of Kathy is admitting, which I loved because it shows her humanity. It shows her as a person of here is why I am the way I am. And I never wanted that for you, but because I didn't deal with my stuff, it impacted you anyway. So the take home message here is if we don't deal with our trauma, it deals with us. And we hurt people unintentionally because we're swinging around a boulder of trauma, pretending it's not there. But meanwhile, people are getting run over. Okay, so that's kind of for me what this comes down to. I give them all a ton of credit, a ton of love, a ton of support. And to me, there is nobody or no family, no situation that is beyond repair. If we want to do different and we get some help around it, and that help can look different, there is always hope. So that's going to be the end of this podcast for me. Season 2, episode 1 in the books. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please, as I mentioned, go over to my Instagram, Your Bish Therapist. Follow me there. Please go to my YouTube, subscribe there. And I just am so grateful for you all. Thank you for your continued support. And I look forward to many more episodes serving Bish. And now on to my disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT. I'm sorry, I lost my place. On YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback. That's a long one. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves and each other. Till next time.